to start recording. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're pleased to be joined by Dr. Ahmed Al-Jallad, the Sophia Chair in Arabic Studies at The Ohio State University. Dr. Al-Jallad is a leading scholar on the history of the Arabic language and Arabian epigraphy, most notably Safiotic. He's authored or edited a number of books, including an outline of the grammar of Safiotic inscriptions and Arabic in context. His most recent book is titled The Damascus Psalm Fragment, Middle Arabic and the Legacy of Old Hijazi, and is a study of the longest Arabic text in the Greek alphabet, which was written in the early Islamic period. Today, Dr. Jallad will be presenting a talk or discussion titled Defining the Role of the Article in Arabic and Semitic Historical Linguistics. So without further ado, Ahmed, please take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen here. Yeah, all right. And okay, slideshow, excellent. Okay, so you see the only the slides, correct? All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Sami and Zainab, for inviting me to speak to your group. It's very nice to be here and see a lot of friendly faces and old friends. And so I really appreciate that. The talk today is on, I would say, pretty the most discussed morphological feature in the history of Arabic, and one that plays an important role in the history of the Semitic languages. So that's the definite article. The definite article, of course, the most common form of the definite article, and the one that students of Arabic will learn immediately today in their classes, is al, right? The prefix al. And of course, it assimilates to consonants in different ways, depending on which dialect of Arabic you speak. But in standard Arabic, the L will assimilate to coronals. And the L article has basically served this special role of identifying pre-Islamic attestations of Arabic. So when scholars look at the pre-Islamic epigraphic record, one of the easiest ways of identifying what is Arabic and what is not Arabic and finding what are generally pre-Islamic attestations of the Arabic language is by identifying the presence of the L article in a given inscription, right? And the linguistic geography of Arabia is traditionally, and of course the Semitic languages more broadly, has been differently cut up based on the shape of the definite article. Okay, so in the, and what I want to do in this talk is sort of problematize that methodology. Using the definite article in this way is simple, but we should recognize it simply as that. It's a simplified methodology that helps us sort of organize a real mess of linguistic diversity into easy categories. What I want to do in this talk is basically go over the history of the definite article within the Semitic language family, then look at the definite article forms in Arabia, in Arabic and non-Arabic languages, and try to reconstruct what form of definite marking Proto-Arabic had, that is the reconstructed ancestor of all varieties of Arabic, what form of definite marking it had, and the variation of definite marking in the pre-Islamic dialects of Arabic as attested in the epigraphic record. And so to begin the talk, I have this nice, let me bring out my pointer here. And please do feel free to interrupt me at any point. This is supposed to be informal, so interrupt me if you have any questions or if you'd like clarifications. This photograph here is, I think, going to frame sort of the kind of complex situation that we'll be discussing in the talk today. It is a photograph of an Aramaic bowl that was published by Rabinovitz in 1956. It comes from Tel Maskhouta from Lower Egypt, basically the Eastern Delta. And it's undated, but paleographically, it looks like it would be places comfortably in the 5th century BCE. And the text it's in Aramaic. It's a dedication by a man named Qainu, son of probably something like Gusham or Gusham, depending on how we pronounce this a little bit, who was called King of Qaidar. And he brought this bowl in offering to a deity called, and you can see it right here, Han Ilat, right? Han Ilat. And Han Ilat is basically, well, literally the goddess, Han being the definite article, and Ilat being the word for goddess or Ilat. And it's thought that this construction is what over time changes through a bunch of ad hoc sound changes, we should say, into Allat, right? Allat is the famous pre-Islamic Arabian goddess that appears in the Quran, for example. Now, Han-Ilat, and so this would suggest that this group, this Arab group, Qaidar, they're identified as Arabs or called Arabs by outsiders and several sources, that they were using a definite article form that was Han, at least Han before a laryngeal, right? Al. But the picture becomes a little bit more complicated because Herodotus, about the same time, also discusses the religion of the Arabs inhabiting the same place. And he describes their goddess and he transcribes it. He says that they are devoted to two gods, and he mentions a goddess and he transcribes it as Al-Ilat with the Al definite article. So you have two testimonies from basically the same period, same place with two different definite article forms, Han and Al. Now it's possible that one could say that the Al-Ilat and people have made this argument that it's the result of corruption, the copying of manuscripts of Herodotus's text. But as we look at the larger picture, the epigraphic landscape of Arabia, we'll see that that situation of Han next to Al within the same languages, within the same groups is not uncommon, which may suggest, in fact, or give support to the fact that Al-Ilat in Herodotus is original, and that somehow the information that came to him on the dialect of this group and these people here had the pronunciation of this goddess name had the definite article Al, whereas the one that we have inscribed on this bowl has Han. And it's important to emphasize as well, even though the language of the bowl, the language of the dedication is Aramaic, as one would expect, this is a lingua franca, the word Han-Ilat is not the Aramaic word for the goddess. It is indeed an Arabian formation, right, with this definite article, Han. So then, let's step back a little bit and talk about the definite article as a morphological feature. So the definite article cannot be reconstructed for Proto-Semitic. This tree comes from Hunegard and Rubin's fantastic 2011 Trees and Waves article in Veiniger et al.'s Handbook of Semitic Languages. Proto-Semitic cannot be reconstructed as having a definite article. East Semitic, these languages do not have a definite article. The languages of the Ethio-Semitic languages do not have a reconstructible definite article. Classical Ethiopic Ge'ez doesn't have a definite article. Modern South Arabian's a bit complicated. We could talk about that in a bit. The definite article occurs only in this cluster of languages here called Central Semitic. But it also cannot be reconstructed for Proto-Central Semitic. So basically, Hunegard and Rubin say, and I'll read you the following, even if we accept that all of the Central Semitic articles come from a single morpheme, which I think is convincing, the fact that the article is non-existent in Ugaritic and Amarnacanite, rare in the earliest Hebrew and Aramaic, along with the fact that we find both the prefix and suffix articles, we'll talk about, all support the idea that that you cannot posit a single way of marking of definite marking for Proto-Central Semitic here. But he says that they go on to say, it is remarkable that syntactic similarities and the use of a small common set of forms to create an article must be attributed either to some dynamic pressure for such a feature, that is to parallel development, or a striking instance of aerial diffusion, or perhaps both, right? And they cite Patel 2009 for further discussion of that. So that's fascinating. We have the definite article basically in these groups of languages, but it's not reconstructible. Okay, when we look at the map, we basically have two patterns. We have a prefixing definite article that stretches from the southern Levant into northern and central Arabia. And then we have the suffixing article, which is typical of Aramaic, which is going to be from the Syrian desert, northern Euphrates. The suffixing article is also found in East Arabia, we'll get to that, and in ancient South Arabia. So both of these, I think the most convincing account is that both of these article types, suffixing and prefixing, still derive from the same morpheme. We could see this in ancient South Arabian. So these are the pre-Arabic languages of the southwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula, the pre-Arabic languages of ancient Yemen that were spoken. We know them, of course, only in written form, and they were presumably spoken until the arrival of Islam. We don't have any accounts in the Islamic period of languages of these types continue to be spoken. Islamic period writers talk about Himyaritic, which is a pre-Arabic language, but it doesn't look like the language of the inscriptions that we'll discuss. So but it seems that these languages remained in use until the Islamic invasion and the annexation. And in ancient South Arabia, the definite article basically has two forms. I'm giving you here, this is the paradigm from Sabaic. It's a final N, okay, on singular noun. So this is the word al meaning statue. So alman would be the statue. And on singular forms, it looks like this. But then on the duals and the masculine plural, it is the form han. So we could say something maybe like salamunahan, right, in that sense. So it's han, and han here actually probably preserves the original morpheme. The others seem to have elided the H, and the original morpheme is simply han. And in fact, in Hadramitic, which is a language here in the eastern part of Yemen, the han form also occurs on singular nouns, suggesting that some sound change probably eliminated the H in the Sabaic paradigm and the paradigm of Vinnaic and Katabanic. Okay. So the presence, now the ancient South Arabian languages have been known to scholarship for since the middle of the 19th century, really, and understood more or less. I mean, the details were still worked out, but they could be understood. And the idea that these languages had a final N article distinguished them immediately from Arabic as we know it. Right, Arabic as we know it does not have a suffixing article, not an N one for that matter. The N in Arabic, in fact, is the tanween, if anything. So they're not the same morpheme, I should say. So that already created this dichotomy in Arabia, where you have the ancient South Arabian languages that have this an article, and then Arabic, which has al. But the exploration of the Arabian Peninsula in the same period produced a wealth of new material to study Arabia's pre-Islamic linguistic diversity. A lot of that material is what we call the Thamudic inscriptions. These are just pre-Islamic Arabian inscriptions that are attested across the Arabian Peninsula, north of Yemen. And these inscriptions showed a different article form. So in a very famous article by the great Arabist Alfred Beeston, where he basically outlines, this is from 1980, outlines the languages of pre-Islamic Arabia. He makes a division. He calls Sayhadic as a term that he uses. Not really many people use it anymore, but it's a term he uses to refer to the ancient South Arabian languages. And he says that these are a separate language group. And then in North Arabia, you have two different language groups. You have one group which uses a definite article that's based on the prefix ha or han. And then you have another one that is al, and that's Arabic. So what's curious about this, if we look at the methodology of classification presented by Hunegard and Rubin, the first thing they say is that, well, the definite article is certainly not reconstructible, and it's not a feature that's going to be very useful for classification, because it's likely either the result of parallel innovation or diffusion. Whereas in the discussion or in the classification of Arabian languages as known from epigraphy, the definite article is the single most important feature that does that, right? And that this neat dichotomy between Arabic as we know it and North Arabian having these han articles is created, right? And it's this logic here that if you look at traditional books on the history of Arabic, you'll find statements like there are only 3 or 5 pre-Islamic Arabic inscriptions. It's this methodology that's informing that kind of judgment. Now, what we can do is look closer at the material and see if, one, is this a methodologically sound way of doing classification, and 2, does it even hold up with the data? So here, for example, here's a sample of the ancient North Arabian inscriptions. These are the pre-Islamic inscriptions from North Arabia that stretch from East Arabia to Central and then West. You see a variety of different scripts, and these are all modern terms for the different alphabets. So Dumaitic is the inscriptions you might find at the Oasis of Duma, Taymanitic at Tayma, and so forth, right? And all of these ancient North Arabian inscriptions are what are called the H dialects, the not Arabic dialects, okay? So let's look a little bit at these. We'll begin in East Arabia, okay? We'll begin in East Arabia in a group of inscriptions called Hassaitic, which are attested from basically the Hassa here in the desert that goes through Thaj all the way to what is the present day UAE. Now, most of these texts are gravestones, so we don't get the chance to see very much. We don't see definite articles when it in such a context. And then when you do get articles on personal names, those aren't necessarily that informative, because personal names move without languages moving. But there are a number of texts that give us insight into what the definite article in East Arabia was. So here's a very nice silver plaque that's been published in 2017 by Peter Stein in the local script this is from the UAE, Riha. And here's the text. It's an offering text, very, very easy. It's by a woman, Li'adam, daughter of Ma'an al-Lat. We don't know the exact vocalization. And then we have here Haknat or Haknat, right? Which means she offered. Okay, this is a very common South Arabian form. Haknat, she offered. Halat, to this goddess, most popular goddess. And then the form, what did she offer? This metal plaque. And the word for metal plaque is here. It's salhaft, all right? And then the definite article is actually a final glottal stop. Salhafta, right? Salhafta dha'at. And the word for this or that is, or this I would say is dha'at. So salhafta dha'at. Now, this is not necessarily, we shouldn't see this as an imitation of the Aramaic article, which is a final long vowel represented by a glottal stop, because this script does not use the hamza or the alif as a letter signifying long ah. It only has a consonantal value. This is truly a final glottal stop as a definite article. Okay, this is what, and there are several other texts that show this as well. This definite article form seems to have been in use in East Arabia, pre-Islamic East Arabia. These texts date to probably the latter quarter of the first millennium BCE. Okay, so these would not be the Han dialects, although they are generally considered to be, how do you say it, North Arabian and not Arabic. This is a beautiful text, and I give you the citation because I'm starting more and more to work with material that gets, especially in light of Corona, that gets published online since we're not able to go out and do field work. And this is a lovely text because we can date it. It's in an Oasis North Arabian script. It is by a man who is called the king of Dumat, and Dumat is a very important oasis in North Arabia. His name is Basran bin Matran. We don't know exactly the vocalization. Malik Dumat. So he's coming from here, and he calls himself Abd Nabunaid or Abd Nabunaid, or we don't know the exact pronunciation, but he is the how they would have pronounced it. But he is the servant of Nabonidus, Malik Babil, king of Babylon. So we know we can date this to the middle of the 6th century BCE. Okay, pretty early. And he said, Natartu, so I'm guarding haghanim, the spoils, bimi'atin farasin wa bimi'atin rakib ibn, right? So with a unit of, with a cavalry unit and a camel unit. All right, so he's guarding spoils. And we see the definite article being used here as ha, right? So middle of the first millennium BC, all the way up here, it's ha. Just a bit later here, we have a completely different definite article form. So we're looking at really quite a bit of diversity in the shape of the definite article. If we now, let's go a little bit into Central Arabia. Here is a Thamudic B text from North Arabia, from the area of Ha'il. Okay, it's beautiful. It's just a small prayer. It's to a deity called Lady of the Mountain Agat, or Ajat. So those of you who know the Arabic material, the Arabic historiographical material in Ansab, Ajat is a mountain that's associated with the Tayyid tribe later, but this must be sometime in the first millennium BCE. And so this person invokes them, Ha ba'alat han Agat. So, O lady of the Agat, and you see here the definite article form is Han, right? Han before Agat, right? And then he just says a simple prayer, Sma'iliya. Listen to me, okay? Thamudic B, North Arabia. Now, this is where the story gets very complicated. We'll look at another Thamudic B text from North Arabia, not very far away. Same script, same prayer, but the article form is different. This is by a person named Bi'attar. Ha Nuhai, this is another deity, O Nuhai. Ilah al-Kabir, or Ilah al-Kubr, God of greatness. Sma' lana. Give ear to us, hear our prayer. And here we have the al article. Very same region, same script, and notice it's even the same text genre, the same kind of prayer. So we have the al article and the han article really just next to each other, very similar to what it seems like Herodotus and the Talmud Khutabol are showing, right? These two forms are right next to each other. If we go to Dadan, which is an oasis in northwestern Arabia, we see something also very interesting. Before laryngals, we have han, but ha otherwise. But you also have marginal cases of use of the al with the lam assimilating article. So here's a nice text, the one that you see here on the wall. It's an offering text. These are very formulaic. It's by a woman named Saballah, daughter of Alu, and she made an offering to Lidhi Ghaibat, to this deity, Ghaibat. And what does she offer? You usually offer the, and this word Z, dotted Z-L-L. We don't know what it is, but it's some kind of offering. And it's usually Habfalal, but here it's with the alif, Abfalal. And then we know it's singular because it's followed by the demonstrative the, which is this one. Okay, so we offering this one, and we see again this interesting situation where the language is absolutely identical, but it's just the article form that's changing, right? And there's another text, this one right here, from the same era, in the same script, but it seems to be pretty late, JSLIH 71, where you have 3 article forms basically in the same inscription. The man in line 3, he says he is from the tribe of Han Ahnikat, and Han here is the article, the Ahnikat tribe, okay? And then he says, the translation here comes from Beeston, basically. It's reproduced on the Oceana database. I don't have a better interpretation, but it's a very strange text, and I'm not sure I'm convinced by this translation, although I don't have a better one. But there are some words we can see. Right here, the word Bil Hijr. Bil Hijr. And Hijr is the name of the settlement near Al-Ula, after the it's a settlement near Dadan, but it's a bit later. So we see the Al article here. It's Al-Hijr in the Quran, for example, Bil Hijr. And then you have the nice Hal form here, Hal Mafal, right? The Hal article. So strictly speaking, 3 different allomorphs of the article in one inscription. Okay, so that nice and clean dichotomy of Al articles, the Al dialects versus Ha dialects, just doesn't actually work when you look at the material closely. It's a much more complicated situation, and it's about to get even more complicated. We can go to Hismaic. Hismaic, these are Datanitic inscriptions are thought to end to disappear at the end of the first millennium BCE, I should say. Now, when we go to Hismaic, these are inscriptions that are carved in another North Arabian alphabet from northwestern Arabia, stretching as far north to Madaba. The language is very close to Arabic, but with one exception. One exception. There is no definite article. This language or dialect group does not have a definite article. And you can see it. This is one of my favorite examples of it. You have a bilingual text where you have Nabatean text here. And then you have the Hismaic text here next to this lovely drawing of a camel. And the Nabatean text contains the name of the guy, Abd al, I guess, Ayyub or Ayyab. I don't know, this is some kind of theophoric element, it seems. Abd al-Ayyab, and you have the al article there, which is what the Nabateans were using most of the time. They use the al article. Look where they are, how close they are to Eastern Egypt, where Herodotus reports the al article, okay? But the Hismaic text sort of translates the name or renders it into their dialect and removes the article. So you just have Abd Ayyab. There's no definite article form at all. And this is a personal name. So they're realizing that when the Nabatean dialect uses al, we don't have anything. They remove it. So in this area, you have no definite article. Okay. And when we go to Safaitic, which is the biggest corpus, I would say the best understood of all of this material, you get everything in this one corpus. You get the Ha article, you get the Al article with assimilation, you get the Han article, sometimes very rare, and you get no article. And what's fascinating about it is it seems that these different article forms can be used by the same person. In fact, that variation may have been not across different dialects, but rather within a person's own idiolect. Now, let's look at this. This is a very nice, this is one of my favorite guys who writes inscriptions. His name is Hamlet, or Hamlet, but Hamlet the Bandit, okay? He calls himself a bandit. His name is Hamlet bin Salim, and he calls himself a-list. List is a Greek loanword into Arabic. It just means the bandit. And in this inscription, both of these texts are written by him. In this one, he calls himself a-list, and it's very clear, it's an alif. And in this text, he calls himself hal-list with the ha article, okay? And it's the same guy. So this is a very, very interesting situation. There are a few other inscriptions that seem to use both article forms as well within the same text. All right. So in fact, it isn't as presented traditionally that you have a a map where you can draw this line. You can use the article to separate two dialectal groupings. Forget languages, dialectal groupings, but rather both forms of the article can co-occur in a single person's language. I don't really say written language, spoken language, that's another matter, but in the single person's language. And Safaitic as well has very late attestations of the situation where you have no definite article. Now, this is a beautiful, okay, this description, I have only the hand drawing here, but it's a very interesting one. So you have a man here named Labu'at, or Lubay'at, which means little lion. He gives a huge genealogy. You see all these bins, many, many generations. And then it's a pretty nice Safaitic inscription. He says, Halla Dawra, Sanat Malik Agrippos bin Herodes, ووجد أثر أخواله الأشلال تيم وقرمة وأحواض وزبيد فنوجع وهادو شري ولات غنيمة لذي دعية ولم يخبل سبر. These two highlighted forms here, this is a formulaic in text, and you'll find it repeated in many, many other inscriptions. In most cases, these have definite articles. Halla Dawra means he camped in this place. And usually you have Halla Had Dawra or Halla La Had Dawra, Dawra meaning place, area. But here there's no article. And you would think that might just be a writing error, but the other place you expect the article, which is in front of the word inscription, sep, where you get it usually, Yukhabbil has-sep, or has-sefra. That's what you usually get. There's no article here. This is clearly a very late, this is clearly a case where this person's dialect does not have a definite article. At the same time, we can date it. It's dated to the year of Agrippa, son of Herod, right? So this is 2nd century CE. So it's quite late and already a dialect without a definite article. So when you look at this, you step back, you look at the whole picture, you can say that there are indeed, we can no longer maintain this idea that there was one definite, that the definite article feature was a binary, and that if you had al, you were Arabic. And if you had, and al only occurs in things that we would call Arabic. And if you had ha, you were not Arabic, and it only occurs in things that are not Arabic. In fact, both article forms seem to, they co-occur in almost every corpus that we have, every script type. In Safaitic, at least, they seem to occur even within individual idiolects, right? And coming back to that situation, that comparing the Tel Maskutabal with Herodotus, the presence of han and al in one place now doesn't look strange, but it actually looks like the norm. In fact, all of these different corpora give us the two article forms next to each other. So what is going on? What's going on? How do we explain this situation? Well, I say, let's begin with the facts. There is no al divide, but we can say that al is concentrated in Northwest Arabia. Indeed, al is the article form that's used by the Nabateans, right? This is the article form that they're using for, and that we get in most of their onomasticon. And whenever they do produce an Arabic text, usually they're writing in Aramaic, but when they do produce an Arabic text, they use the an L dialect, okay? The prefixing article too is not a given. It is something that the Arabian languages in Northwestern Arabia and spreading down into Central Arabia, this is a feature they share with Canaanites, right? They share this feature with Canaanites. The suffixing article forms that you get throughout Arabia look like Aramaic, in fact. And it's Arabic is sharing this prefixing feature, and especially the languages of North Arabia with the ha form as well, they're sharing this with Canaanites. And the final thing, the final fact, in languages like Hismaic, which don't have a definite article, they do have ha. They have this prefix ha, but it functions as a proximal demonstrative. That's it. So it's very common, you know, the demonstrative to article. I mean, that's not shocking at all. But we can see in Hismaic actively where the ha morpheme, we can say, is a demonstrative. It's not. It doesn't work as an article at all, and it only occurs when we are when authors are pointing at a structure that they built or a rock art that they carved, and they're saying this particular text is mine or this particular thing is mine. But otherwise, it's absent, right? With those facts, I'm going to try to propose a reconstruction. This han morpheme, right? We would say that the han morpheme is the original morpheme, HA, and maybe we can just put some liquid there at the end. That this is the original origin of the prefixed article. So I'm agreeing with Chomper here, and it takes shape in the second millennium Levant, end of the second millennium Levant. Old Arabic, let's say even Proto-Arabic. I think looking at this entire spectrum of diversity, we would say that there's no reason for us to reconstruct a definite article for Old Arabic. There are enough dialects and there's enough evidence that there are forms of Arabic without the definite article, and there's a lot of variation in its in the way it manifests too. So we could probably propose an Old Arabic that's very much like Proto-Canaanite maybe or Ugaritic that doesn't have a definite article. And therefore it is the contact situation of Old Arabic with the Canaanite languages in the southern Levant that produces, that allows the article to diffuse from Canaanite to Arabic. Okay, it allows the article to diffuse from Canaanite to Arabic. So we're assuming that there is a situation of bilingualism. We can at least prove that there is some bilingualism going on. There is at least one bilingual inscription from this earlier period, or biscriptal inscription, we should say. But there's a lot of contact, and there's certainly no reason. It would be very odd if we were to assume absolutely no, how do you say it? No linguistic contact. And things like this, the prefixing article and from the same morpheme shared between the two types is a good example of that kind of a contact feature. But Arabic is a bit different. So Arabic brings in the Han article, but Arabic has another allomorph, a presentative, demonstrative thing, which is hal. Okay, it already exists, and in both of these forms you can find them in Ugaritic as well. The HL you can find in Ugaritic as well. So these seems to be early allomorphs of the same demonstrative element, we'll say, or presentative element. Okay, and they seem, I would suggest that they were perhaps in complementary distribution. This is what the inscriptions look like. So in the next slide, we'll try to map out the genealogy of the articles in Arabic. So over here, we'll say that the Han article enters Arabic through contact, and it gets arranged in this kind of paradigm, where the Han and the Hal are sort of in complementary distributions, perhaps phonologically conditioned. Han before coronos and Hal otherwise, all right? And then, of course, the Han and the N is going to assimilate in those contexts, right? And in fact, that's the distribution that gives you classical Arabic with just simply the sound change, which is attested, I think, in other contexts as well in Arabic, of the H going to a glottal stop in initial position, right? So this original, let's say, distribution, phonologically motivated distribution gives rise to the classical Arabic distribution, which is A before A with gemination before coronals and Al otherwise. Nabatean Arabic does something completely different. Nabatean just keeps the Hal, it gets rid of the Han completely, and what you end up with in Nabatean is Al in all situations. So Nabatean Arabic does not assimilate the L to anything that comes after it. Of course, that's a weird thing to assimilate. In fact, the L isn't assimilating according to this argument. The L is just being distributed, has a different distribution than the original An one. But Nabatean just doesn't do that and uses L in front of everything. So you get things like al-sufle, right? The lowest, the lower part of something, right? You get things like al before any coronal, any liquid, right? Safiyitic and the North Arabian inscriptions went another route. They got rid of the Hal one and kept the Han one, right? And you end up getting both the Ha and the A articles in Safiyitic. And of course, in modern Yemeni, those can be derived from the Han as well, where you get An, this is attested in modern Yemeni, and maybe through the assimilation, you get a form Am as well. So all of these different lineages of Arabic and their diverse forms of the definite article can be maybe traced back to this one original situation, which is motivated by contact, right? And that's why you have this diffusion out from Northwest Arabia. If you look at the periphery of Arabia, East Arabia and South Arabia, they do not have this article type, okay? Now, the geography, when I hear modern Yemeni, this is a modern geography or medieval geography. That's where these article forms occur in medieval times. But in pre-Islamic times, there's a attestation of the M article, for example, as far north as Tabuk in northern Arabia. You have the An and Han articles, as you saw in Central Arabia. So when you go further back in time, these articles are also moving geographically back towards North Arabia, okay? So that would be and then when we look at it in this sense, we see that the entire criterion of the definite article for even understanding the development of Arabic, the classification of Arabic, and the classification of the languages of Arabia is fundamentally misguided. All of these, there's no single corpus that shows that simplistic dichotomy. And in all cases, we can argue for a situation where there's some degree of variation, whether within a single speaker's lect or within the dialectal, let's say, dialectal gradient of a specific area, you have different forms of the article sort of coexisting. Now, it's not hard to see why this distribution is the most common distribution today. Almost all Arabic, it's almost as if a bottleneck happened in the Islamic period, the explosion of Islam and all this. This is basically what you find almost everywhere, except for in these, very peripheral dialects in Yemen and relics and remnants elsewhere. This is what you get everywhere. And that's not hard to explain, of course, because this distribution of the dialect gets associated with a prestige register, right? It becomes this is the distribution that you get in classical Arabic, that you get in the prestige dialect as it's used almost anywhere. It doesn't even have to be classical Arabic, but just the spoken prestige dialects that would have spread with the conquest. And it's not long before most of the other dialect or article forms sort of disappear, essentially, except in these very isolated places in Yemen where they happen to remain in use till today. Okay, so the talk that I gave basically is more or less a summary of the material that you can find in this article here. What is ancient North Arabian? There should be a question mark after it, well, if you go to this website, you can find the actual article where it goes into the data, of course, in a much more detailed way, and it plots out everything in I think with with more references and things of that sort. So if you were curious, or if you want to look more into this and look at the data, you can go to that article. And of course, we can now discuss the material that I presented. Thank you for your attention.